I'd like to welcome you to this event this evening, Proptech Explained, and hopefully you will come away with a better idea of what the sector's about at the end of the evening. Welcome to everybody in person. Welcome also to those people who are joining us remotely. This is a hybrid event. By way of a brief intro, my name's Steve Barnett. I'm a partner in the VC team at Shoosmiths, based here in our London office. We're very excited to be able to partner with Pi Labs and Sifted on the preparation of this new report. I'm going to hand over to Éanna Kelly in a couple of minutes. He will take us through the slides, give us his insights from the report, and after that there will be a panel discussion. We're grateful for Faisal, CEO of Pi Labs, Jade Cohen, CEO and founder of Qflow, and William Rice, CEO and founder of Generation Home, for agreeing to join us and sharing their insights. At the end of the session, try and wrap up around 6:45, and there'll be drinks and networking for those who are joining us in person. We hope you'll be able to stay for that. A couple of housekeeping points at the outset. So I have to say this, no fire alarms planned. So if the alarm does go off, it's real and we will direct you out of the building. If you could please keep your phones on silent or switched off for the duration of the session, that would be appreciated. We've had a number of questions in advance, which we will try to get to during the session, if time permits. Also, people can send questions in online, and we will try to answer them afterwards as well. So I'm going to hand over to Éanna, leave you in his capable hands for 15 minutes or so, and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Oops, spilled my water. That's a bad start. So, hello everyone. Just going to set my timer here. 1 second. Great. Hello. Welcome. Hello to the online audience as well. Welcome to the TED Talk. So I've been given 20 minutes, but hopefully I'll be done in 15 because death by PowerPoint is, dangerously common. So I don't want to do that to you guys. So here we are. Let me just say a few things about who we are to start off with. We are Sifted. This is the Sifted crew here. I've got some colleagues in the audience as well. So we are a news company, a 3-year-old news company, and we were started by the innovation editor of the FT, John Thornhill, and his reckoning or his reasoning for starting a company was that there's so many good tech companies in Europe, and the FT just doesn't have the scope to cover all of them. And the FT is probably more focused on public companies anyway. So we set up Sifted to focus on the new economy companies. That's just me in the middle there. And we have a nice dog as well, I should point out, Arlo. He's a good doggy. So what did we set out to do with this Proptech Reports? So Pi Labs and Shoosmiths, the two sponsors, wanted us to write an accessible, enjoyable, insightful report and try and introduce more people to the world of prop tech, property tech. And this is the end result. We hit publish today. And so PropTech, a very simple explanation for what PropTech is. It's people who are using tech to try and make the real estate sector a little bit easier for buyers, for sellers, for tenants, for landlords. And the appeal of the sector is very clear. It's a huge asset class, as you can see here, 10.5 trillion in 2020. And PropTechs within the real estate space, PropTechs are certainly enjoying life at the moment. You can see here funding has shot up in the last 5 years. And we can ask what is putting this rocket under PropTech. Well, I guess we have an industry that has a lot of reliance on basic office software, and that leaves the door open for a lot of modernizers, a lot of would-be disruptors to come in and do something a bit different. So Europe has quite a few lively PropTech hubs, as we can see here. You've got London, you've got Paris, but you've also got Barcelona and Madrid on this little chart here, which is nice. So yeah, we took a very broad definition of PropTech, by the way. We didn't discriminate too much. And we found, when we started researching a little bit, we found companies that were doing a little bit of everything, companies that were doing things with AI, with big data, with SaaS. Of course, SaaS is probably the predominant tool that people are working on in this space. So yeah, we see all kinds of tech under PropTech, and it's a fairly all-encompassing term, PropTech. It has elements of fintech, legal tech, so lots of spillovers there, and you could probably have an argument about what the real definition of PropTech is. And I hope we do on the panel afterwards. So yeah, what is motivating PropTech people? Well, we find actually there's quite a few people who worked in construction or worked in the real estate sector, and they bumped up against some kind of frustration, and they are re-entering the sector now with some solutions. So yeah, a lot of interviewees told us Excel, a lot of reliance on Excel in the industry, and yeah, people think they can do something a little bit better than Excel. No shade on Excel, it's pretty good, but yeah, so, oh, well, I've just said this basically. So yeah, there's a lot of pain points in real estate. There's, it's highly labor intensive, a lot of paperwork, many hours, many intermediaries. So I think it's ripe for change. And here we go. We made an attempt to split the PropTech family in three. The PropTech innovators. We had this little taxonomy from PropTech Capital that we borrowed. Thank you, guys. So we have activities that correspond to search. This is companies that are trying to improve the buying parts of real estate, so buying properties. So we also have supervised. This is companies that are trying to help with the day-to-day management of commercial properties or residential properties. And then a category of companies under sell. They're helping to improve the selling process of real estate. Yeah, and this is a little snapshot within the reports. We have a bunch of companies here. We have Generation Home pop up here. They're on the panel, which is nice. We also have companies like Mackler, online brokerage firm. We have in Germany. We have Nodal View. They're a Belgian company. They're helping real estate agents with some kind of virtual reality tech, helping these estate agents basically show people property remotely, which is quite nice. And then the supervised phase, we have, we're talking about software management systems. We have the likes of Plentific here, a UK company. They're developing a SaaS platform for repair and management work in buildings. Yeah, and finally we have Sell and the after-sales process and the after-sales experience of real estate. And we have a few companies there like Luco and Clickalia, Codit. This is just a slide illustrating, what these PropTech, who these PropTech pace setters are targeting, and what kind of reasons people collaborate with PropTechs. Of course, it's to root out inefficiencies, to help smooth project management, to help customer engagement. There are some of the big ones there. Yeah, some of the tides that are turning in favor of PropTech. So we have some broad cultural, behavioral, legal changes that are helping this sector, arguably. COVID, of course, has helped a lot of tech companies. We've all changed our behavior a little bit. We're all online more. We're using more online tools. And we've seen a normalization of remote and distributed work because of COVID as well. And that's led to new arrangements, co-working arrangements. My company is in a co-working site, for instance. Rising interest rates, perhaps, is another thing that might favor PropTech. It's bad news for home buyers, of course, but it might help property if people move money into real estate, if it's seen as a more predictable or safer investment in rocky times. And then you have this sustainability overhaul, so tightening rules for aging building stocks, and then that just opens opportunities for environmental performance analytics companies. We have one of them on the panel. Jade will be speaking about that a little bit, I think, later. Yeah, what else do we have? So new technologies like virtual reality, we mentioned already, augmented reality. There's some decent use cases we're seeing already in PropTech. Blockchain, the solution that's looking for a problem. But actually, I think in real estate, we're seeing it employed a little bit. There's a German company, Expro, that are doing this, offering this fractional ownership. They're offering people digital shares for part ownership of buildings, which is interesting. I think some people are skeptical about it, but it seems to be a bit of a growing trend. Then, of course, you have rocketing house prices, which are, putting a lot of pressure on governments to build more houses, build more buildings. So that's going to have an impact as well, of course, on PropTech. But yeah, they're not having it all their own way, of course. There's some obstacles still for PropTech. A lot of people, a lot of interviewees in the report talked about ingrained behaviors and how difficult it was. You came up against a lot of resistance to digital tools. I think some of that is falling away already, but still, it takes a while for behavior to change. Yeah, some people mentioned it's quite a cliquey world, real estate, very relationship-driven, this person said. Not easy to get in front of the right people, so I guess for outsiders looking to come in and disrupt, it's a little bit tricky, potentially. And then you have some of the standard issues that all business-to-business companies face. For instance, winning clients can take a long time. It's also considered a conservative sector, so it potentially has an impact as well. And we know European markets are very, very different. You've got different languages, cultures, so that throws up a few obstacles as well. And then B2C, business to consumer companies, they face some of the usual problems, marketing costs, churn rates, and we don't see too many B2C PropTechs in Europe, actually. It seems to be mainly B2B. And we asked some people to make some predictions, so this is one here. One-click mortgage, it sounds like a holy grail. I don't know if it'll ever happen. I don't know if it can happen, but it would be nice. Fractional ownership, we mentioned. Co-investment is going to be a growing trend. Co-investment in houses, buildings. Interesting. I don't know. And then, yeah, this pressure to go carbon neutral, of course, is changing behaviors and unlocking opportunities for some people, of course. And there we have it. So I'm within 12 minutes, which is good. That's just an overview of our reports. And now we're going to segue straight into a panel, which is great. Thank you. So joining me are Faisal Butts, CEO and founder of Pi Labs, a London VC firm that backs companies at the forefront of digitalizing real estate and construction. We have Steve Barnett, who introduced himself already. We have Jade Cohen, co-founder and CPO at Qualis, a UK company that has developed a platform to help contractors and major projects manage their social and environmental impact. We have Will Rice. He is co-founder and CEO of Generation Home, UK mortgage lender launched in 2020 that aims to make it easier for first-time buyers to purchase a home with support from family and friends. Great. Thank you, guys. I think if you want to give yourselves a little introduction, we have good time now. I've saved us a bit of time on the presentation. If you want to say a few words about yourself.
Sure. Should I take it left to right?
Go for it.
Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Will. I founded Generation Home with my wife, Sophia, nearly 3 years ago. We were lucky to go on the Pi Labs program in, cohort 7 or so. In 2019, and ever since we've been navigating the complex world of building a business to transform outcomes for customers in a highly regulated and antiquated environment. But we've had a really exciting 12 months or so since we launched, and are currently on track to become one of the 20 largest mortgage lenders in the UK during the course of this year, and putting thousands of aspiring first-time buyers into homes where previously there weren't any solutions for them. So look forward to talking to all of you about the opportunities and challenges that we've seen and we're trying to tackle in the world of residential real estate.
Hi everyone, my name's Jade. As mentioned, one of the co-founders of QFlow. So we work primarily within construction, so we're helping construction companies manage their resources much more efficiently and sustainably by ensuring that they know all their material flows going in and out of any new builds or fit-out type projects. My background is actually working in construction, specifically within environmental management. My co-founder, my equivalent work wife, I suppose, in this sense, came from a design, civil engineering background. So we've kind of combined the specialisms and built a business around that effectively to look at the UK market at first. Obviously construction being a huge portion of kind of the wider property and real estate space as well, which we'll go into later on. And yeah, some really interesting developments particularly in the climate space and some of the carbon legislation coming out soon as well. Again, topics for later on, but yeah, very exciting space to be in.
I'll go again, even though I've already done this to a degree. So I'm Steve Barnett. I'm a corporate partner at Shoosmiths, but my day-to-day job, I'm a VC lawyer, so I get involved in documenting all sorts of VC investments and exits and everything else that goes with that. And I work closely with the Pi Labs guys as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Faisal. I'm the founder and CEO of Pi Labs. We are a PropTech-focused VC. We've been investing in this space since 2015, so we now, across 3 funds, have over 60 investments. We've just announced our latest fund this week, which is just over $90 million. So really excited to be supporting the next generation of PropTech founders, following in the footsteps of Will and Jade.
Great, thank you guys. Well, as you can see from the slides, we went with a pretty broad definition of PropTech, and we've already had conversations about what exactly PropTech is, and I don't even know if you would consider yourself a PropTech company. I don't know. I would like to ask you, first of all, does PropTech matter to you, or do you see yourself as a fintech company?
Sure. I don't spend too much time thinking about the labels, but it actually is important, and I probably should spend a little bit more time because where it really matters, I think, is from an employer brand building perspective and a hiring perspective, particularly when it comes to hiring engineering and product talent. So at the moment, we truly are a purely financial services focused business insofar as we provide financing for the purchases of homes, but our services don't yet extend to other parts of the value system, the ecosystem. But the direction that we're taking the business is towards offering consumers a holistic service, and saying that, essentially taking accountability as a business, saying that we will take responsibility for turning somebody into a homeowner in an ecosystem in which you have fragmented professional service providers who play bit part roles in navigating a customer towards their desired outcome. So that's a long way of saying, at the moment we're definitely very much a fintech, but actually I think there's a reasonable argument to say that we're moving much further into the property space. I think that it's easier to hire positioning yourself as a fintech than as a proptech. I think that's an interesting challenge to the proptech community and businesses that operate within property services. And I think it is going to get better through time, and I've already actually started to notice a bit of a difference over the last 12 months, both from the investor community, but also from talent, realizing that some of the hardest problems that remain to be solved and can be solved with technology sit in this online to offline or analog space. So I think there is a bit of a trend starting to move towards PropTech being a more attractive label to have.
Yeah, there's also an advantage to sit at this intersection. If you're a real estate fintech or intersection of fintech and PropTech, from a capital raising perspective, you can raise from the fintech funds, but you can also raise from the PropTech funds, and you can also raise from the generalist funds. There's a larger pool of capital available to you.
I'll happily straddle that.
Yeah.
Is interesting about a talent point there as well, because we've noticed the same thing. I think companies and organisations will tend to not just sit in a single vertical, you'll cross over. So for us, it's not fintech and proptech, but we'll cross over into clean tech, or sort of the sustainability space as well, with regards to what we do, but we specifically focus on the construction phase. So there's contact within there as well. So there's loads of different labels. But we've noticed more and more people in hiring now, especially for customer-focused roles or customer-facing roles, that they're interested in this space in construction, even without any background in construction whatsoever, because they see it as a ripe opportunity to change and something needs to be done, especially in the ESG space as well. So sustainability is always quite attractive to a lot of people anyway. The same goes when you're having a social impact as well. But yeah, definitely noticed a sort of growing trend where people are realising, because of the size of the opportunity around it, that's what's attracting people, not the fact it's an antiquated old school industry. It's because of what you can change within that's shifting, I think. Yeah.
And real estate, from our perspective, with residential real estate, and it's the same with what you're referring to there with sort of the ESG angle. It sits at the root of so many different social issues that we do have the advantage of very mission-led businesses that are able to draw talent on the basis of the impact that people are able to have. So where you might suffer from perhaps the sometimes perception of less technically interesting engineering challenges to address, the actual mission and social impact that the businesses in this space are solving are really notable.
Yeah. I think PropTech is a very short word to cover a very wide sector. When you look at the Pi Labs portfolio, it's very diverse, but it all falls within PropTech. A lot of the work we're doing at the moment is construction tech or clean tech. Again, similar clean tech is PropTech. It doesn't really get you to a very easy way of explaining the wider piece, I think. It's much more complicated than that.
I think one of the ways to explain it is that, real estate itself is quite multidisciplinary. So if you take a look at the whole real estate value chain, you've got a legal transaction that takes place, right? So there are companies that we've invested in, such as a company called Vauban that digitalizes the creations of SPVs and fund vehicles. They consider themselves a legal tech, right, or reg tech. But we've been able to look at them through the lens of PropTech. Equally, Will's business, his business is digitalizing the financing of real estate. We can look at it as part of the value chain of real estate, like financing real estate. So we, internally at Pi Labs, we've actually mapped out the value chain of sourcing real estate, the due diligence and financial analysis of real estate, the actual purchase transaction, the financing, the legal administration around it, the asset management, the property management. When you take it all the way through, it's very multidisciplinary. And if you're investing across that spectrum, or all the tech that can enable every step along the way, you're going to be touching a number of different subsectors of tech. You'll be backing legal tech businesses, fintech businesses, clean tech businesses, construction tech businesses. So it is really a broad kind of banner under which a lot of other categories of tech sit.
Yeah, I remember when I first heard PropTech, I didn't immediately twig property. I didn't think property, so there's a little, I think some people just don't know what PropTech means when they hear it. So it has that little thing to overcome, little obstacle. But I think we saw on the slides that there's definitely an appetite for PropTech companies now. Fundraising investment is going up. And I'd just be curious to find out, what are your experiences like now? Do you see every part of real estate embracing PropTech now, or is there still this resistance that some people talked about? How are you guys finding it?
I mean, I'll speak from the sort of construction side of things. Yeah. So again, very a lot of traditional ways of working and sort of stuck in ways. Oh, a little bit bounce back there. I think there's, particularly since COVID, that has helped, I think, accelerate a lot of companies' willingness to try out new things because they're having to work more remotely. Their workforce is completely changing, and construction out of the wider kind of property or real estate space operates on extremely small margins of anywhere between 1% to 3%. So there's an appetite there that now they can see that there are other organisations and players coming into this space like Google and Amazon who have completely different business models, but they're operating on 10-20% margins when it comes to the construction space. And so I think the industry as a whole is much more willing to adapt and take on these new technologies that are having a direct impact on their efficiency gains. And what we've seen in particular, the ESG space has just flown up in the last sort of 18 months in particular. So as a business, we've been going around for about just under 4 years now in terms of when we initially got founded. And a lot of that early days, you're obviously building up your initial client base and building your MVP, etc. But now it's not even a question for companies to adapt new technologies when there are ESG benefits because of the drivers and legislation and also just investor pressures as well that are now starting to filter down the chain. So I think for us, we've seen there's still challenges and there's still certain organisations and individuals that are going to be slightly slower moving. That's always going to be the case. But particularly last 18 months, we've seen a vast ease in terms of, or rephrase it, it's been much easier to kind of get in with new organisations who might be particularly antiquated because they realise the potential there. Yeah. That's just from our perspective, at least, anyway.
Within the residential space, honestly, I think that the biggest change that has been forced on or brought on the industry since COVID hit is just people working from home. To be honest, there was a shock to the system when lockdown started and the industry just didn't work. Right? You couldn't visit homes for a surveyor to go and run a valuation, so lenders had to make immediate decisions about their risk tolerance for running desktop valuations or automated valuations, AVMs. It put a lot of glue in the system. A lot of people they changed their risk appetite. Lenders changed their risk appetite to make sure they were able to continue lending despite not being able to go into people's homes to run valuations. But a lot of them actually then subsequently wound back those changes when the situation normalized. So what we saw was a temporary reaction in order to keep business ticking along through lockdown, but then they moved back to a more conservative position in terms of their approach subsequently. There's definitely a gradual move towards acceptance of technology-led valuation solutions, but it is slow, and our experience of navigating risk departments in incumbent institutions is it's going to continue to be slow. It's not the availability of technology that stops change from happening, it's the attitudes of incumbents and their willingness to change. There is definite willingness to embrace change, but when it comes to practical measures that people are willing to take, the real question to a lender is like, how big a deposit do you need to feel comfortable not seeing that property? Or what type of property, whether it's a terraced house or a new build, are you comfortable not going out to see before you lend against it? And it's when it comes down to those specific questions that we see a lot of resistance, while there's a lot of lip service paid to a desire to embrace technology and embrace change in order to deliver better customer outcomes.
That's also the opportunity as well, isn't it? Because it feels like the sector's at that stage where it wouldn't take too much more for it to really be rocket fueled, I think.
Our position is that, well, frankly, I think it's the challenges that exist in revolutionizing this space are not around creating new technologies. It's about applying technologies that exist today with new business models. And one of the great challenges that I think extends across the whole Proptech space, whichever area you're looking at, is the complexity of stakeholders involved. So building a successful business in this space requires navigating a whole range of stakeholders with very, very different interests. And our journey certainly has been one of trying to corral many parties who are outside of our own control and try and take them in the same direction that we're heading.
Actually, that's interesting. It comes back to the point made earlier as well around, you think about PropTech, and even in the report, there's sort of various different technologies which are gaining traction, particularly in this market as well as others. But actually, a lot of the complexity isn't around the tech itself. A lot of PropTech businesses will be very unsexy tech, and it won't necessarily be cutting edge on that side of things, but actually it's the application, it's the way it's adopted into certain workflows or some specialist piece of knowledge that you wouldn't know because it's quite a convoluted workspace if you're not coming from that sector, which is why it's also very important that in particular founders in this space come from the space themselves and they have experience in it, because it does mean that you see those things that other people wouldn't from the outside. And there's a perfect example of Katera, if anybody has followed the story of Katera, particularly in the US and what happened there. And there's a lot of reasons as to why that didn't work out for them, and what happened over the last 12 months in particular. But again, you look at the founding team, it didn't come from the space directly. We're trying to completely disrupt workflows in a way that just didn't work between lots of different markets geographically. And so, yeah, I think that the tech part of it is, whilst and there are technology businesses who are operating at the very cutting edge of their fields within the property space, a lot of it is actually pretty unsexy as well.
And we saw in the reports, actually we saw when we were chatting to people, that there's so many business-to-business solutions out there in PropTech. There's fewer business-to-consumer companies, I think. Generation Home would be an exception. And why is that, do we think? Why is that the case in Europe? Because I think there are B2C success stories in the US, for instance.
I can only really speak to the residential real estate space. I wouldn't be able to say anything of note for any other spaces. So I'll focus on that, and some of the lessons might extend. You guys might be able to draw them out into other lessons. Yeah. So it's not, if you wanted to build a successful company, I wouldn't recommend that you try and get started in residential real estate. There are many ways that you could build a highly successful business without trying to take on the unique challenges that are presented when you get started in this area. So I'll list a few of them. From our perspective, we've had to deal with complex regulation, right? We weren't able to spin up a proof of concept spin up an MVP and develop proof of concept. We had to spend 18 months working with the regulator to become an authorized mortgage business. We couldn't start testing our product once we were regulated without having money to deploy. So you've got extensive complexity, either capital intensity, raising that money yourself and convincing VCs or other investors that it's a good idea to give you a dollar with a cost of capital of whatever number you might want to put on it and invest it into a mortgage with a return of 2 or 3% in order to develop proof of concept. So there's your second challenge. Third one, I spent more money than I'd care to tot up on legal expenses and navigating a complex environment in which we're trying to innovate and push boundaries. So there are all sorts of things that many startup businesses wouldn't have to deal with in getting started. So if you were starting at the sort of on a monopoly board, if you were standing at Go and you were determined to get round the board and you were thinking like, what's the best way of doing this? Trying to come into this space is not the way to go. The reason we did it is because we cared deeply about the issue, and there's the opportunity to change, to deliver societal change, right? The problem that we're tackling at Generation Home is the fact that home ownership rates have collapsed. And home ownership as a key engine of wealth creation means that has an enormous impact on wealth distribution in society. So tackling that problem gives you the opportunity to transform millions of people's lives. So it's a battle that's worth fighting. But there are certainly a lot of complexities that you've got to navigate along the way. And essentially up until now, I say this somewhat flippantly, we have raised $1.5 billion in asset financing in order to essentially run a large-scale proof of concept so that we can innovate at a pace that's dictated by us without having to get buy-in from third parties with their own risk appetites, demonstrate to them what we can do and what they could do, and then start to move the boundaries. There are very, very high barriers to entry, but I think very big rewards if you can get it right.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot of money you raised. Amazing. Faisal, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, if you look at the US PropTech landscape, there's been many more consumer PropTechs that have been that you hear of and that have raised investment, and that's because they have a large homogeneous home market, and you can really build a consumer product at scale there. Whereas you take a look at Europe, a lot of small fragmented markets, and consumer businesses or consumer tech businesses are inherently less scalable across geographical boundaries because you've got the different nuances in each market, the different languages, etc. Whereas with B2B PropTechs, it's just an inherently globally scalable business model. So, we have a business, for example, they're based in Bulgaria. They're called Office R&D with a headquarters in Sofia, Bulgaria. They've built a global business. They've got a third of their customers in North America, a third in Asia, a third in Europe. And that type of business model is just inherently more globally scalable. And I think it's because of the type of geography and history we have here in Europe that you're seeing a real surge in the B2B business models that can achieve scale globally as opposed to these small consumer fintechs in each country.
Yeah.
Like I think Gen Home would find it difficult to go into Austria or France, right?
It would be more work than
Yeah.
many businesses transferring.
Yeah,
One other thing I would
impossible.
add is trust as well.
Yeah.
I think this could apply to different areas of real estate, but there's a question that we get from customers, which I didn't expect before we launched, which is there's a real trust around your permanency. Are you still going to be there in 2 years' time or 5 years' time or 10 years' time? And I was surprised by that initially, which is probably foolish, but people have been very willing to give their own money to challenger bank startups that came along offering liability solutions without asking those questions, and they were taking your money. We're giving you money, but people are highly suspicious about whether you're a reputable institution. And the reason for it is people don't know what will happen to their home if you cease to exist. It's just, as a first-time buyer, you're going through this whole learning journey of how the housing market works, learning words like conveyancing and so on. And you just have no idea what happens if my mortgage lender is no longer there. Everyone's accustomed to the idea that you've got sort of your big six high street lenders, Lloyd's always by your side, right? Like, why do they trade on that as their key tagline? It's this idea of permanency. So to be a challenger coming into the space, despite the fact that we're giving you our money rather than vice versa, there's an incredibly high trust barrier that you need to get over. And that's something that will take a long time to develop and requires a huge amount of work. So I think that's a challenge that I wouldn't be surprised if it sort of extends across certain other areas of the PropTech space, given the value of the transaction that's involved.
Yeah. Yeah,
And the regulation you'd have to go through to enter the other European markets and stuff.
Yeah, I could ask Steve about that. Steve, do you have any take on all these legal challenges that PropTechs face?
Well, I mean, I completely agree with what's been said. I mean, the B2B space is just easier to scale in. You are dealing with jurisdictional issues. Forget the language. There's just jurisdictional issues from country to country in Europe. And it's hard to get through that. If you want to disrupt the property purchase market in the UK or the rental market in the UK, that's one thing. If you want to export that to France, etc. That's a whole new business line and way of working and getting up to speed with. It's just not easy to do that.
I mean, from when we've backed deals in Germany, we have to go in and do the notarization.
That's not even the business model. That's the legal process.
But just that shows you how different the systems are.
Yeah, it's a big overall market if you think about the EU, but within it, it's painfully fragmented.
Yeah, well, that's true. So I should check in with the audience at this point and just see if anyone wants to react to anything they've heard or ask a question. I see someone here.
A question for everybody, which is, have you got any examples of governments getting in the way? So have you found that government regulation has helped you do what you want to do, or has it actually been a barrier? Any examples you've used?
I mean, we have a nice example in, again, touching on the ESG space, just because obviously that's where we're operating in. So usually our main barriers from governments is that they're not acting fast enough for legislation to make the changes we need, moving towards net zero specifically. There's been a really interesting development recently, though, with a piece of legislation that's amending the building regulations called Part Z. I don't know if anybody's heard of it or not, but it follows Part L, which is around the operational phase of buildings, which looks at putting in strict mitigation measures on how you measure carbon, but also limits on that as well. And so actually over time, the built environment as a whole has become very, very good at how we manage, or better, at how we manage live buildings and optimise and gain efficiencies in the way that we heat it and light it, etc. And we're now starting to do the same thing with Part Z, which is looking at the upfront emissions. So there's a piece of legislation, this amendment going through at the moment, which if it does go through over the next few months, will kick in from January 2023, where it will become mandatory for pretty much most commercial and eventually residential new stock to do whole life carbon assessments, including their embodied carbon, which is all the materials and goods and stuff that goes into a building, measure it in a certain way, and then they'll start putting caps on that from 2027 onwards. Now, arguably 2027 is still too late if you're looking at wider global carbon targets. However, that's for us, it's a perfect piece of legislation because it's almost built around the concept of what we're building right now at Qflow in terms of the data feeding into those calculations. So that's been a really nice example recently of where there are drivers, but just arguably a bit too slow than we would like in particular.
I can give a tangential example. I'm not sure it counts necessarily as helping or hindering us, but I think that the government has played a considerable role in disrupting in all the wrong ways the residential real estate market over the last 18 months. I think that the extension of the stamp duty holiday cuts to second homeowners and buy-to-let landlords was deeply unconscionable and pushed homeownership out of reach for many, many more first-time buyers. I also think that it has led to the situation that we've now got in the market in which essentially there is an acute shortage of supply. I don't know if any of you guys have seen something similar, but in the area that I live, there are estate agents who are pinning up notices on their boards outside homes saying more properties like this urgently required. Or you can go on Rightmove pages and find fewer than a single page of search results. And the reason is that the stamp duty holiday obviously pulled forwards all of the supply that was potentially going to come to market over the coming year, 2 years, 3 years. Who knows how long this disruption is going to be? But it pulled forward so much supply into a limited window that since it ended, the market has been extraordinarily short on supply. Demand has held up, and house prices have continued to move steeply north. Last month, I think house prices were up 2.2% month on month. And it's the products of the supply shortage that the stamp duty holiday engineered. So the government pays a lot of lip service to helping first-time buyers, but has definitely been the biggest culprit in exacerbating the problem over recent years.
Probably a question for Faisal, actually, so I'm putting you on the spot, Faisal.
Sure.
So putting you on the spot, Faisal, in the businesses that you've looked at and invested in, do you think governments have facilitated the use of technology or got in the way, on average?
I mean, I haven't seen the UK government play any proactive role at being I'm thinking of like direct impacts, at being an enabler or not an enabler. There was an attempt at setting a PropTech advisory panel up, you may recall, about 2 years ago. And we were invited to be part of that panel and be part of the conversation that the government wanted to have in terms of using technologies to help with the housing crisis. And this is a Ministry of Housing initiative. But because of all the changes that have happened in that ministry, they just haven't been able to pass the baton on from one leader to the other. So the initiative is pretty much is dormant at this point in time. So we as investors don't wait around for the regulation to be supportive or not supportive. We're looking at the management team. We're looking at the wider market opportunity. Our diligence will consider regulatory changes, but it won't be a driver of the investment.
Thank you very much. Anyone else want to ask a question? I think this guy had his hand up, but then we'll come to you.
With regards to the whole idea of Brexit, how does it affect the, because you have just previously mentioned that there will be difficulties in having cross-border jurisdiction of having those kind of like real estate developing in the EU. So with regards to Brexit, how do you guys think it would affect the real estate market in both the UK and the EU in general? Thank you.
From my perspective,
It doesn't affect us, I'm afraid. As you know, our business model is not subject to it at all.
Do you want to take that, Steve?
About the definition of a hospital pass. I mean, I work on, I guess, English law investments, but I work across Europe. I mean, I haven't drilled down into the nitty-gritty, but I can tell you the market is buoyant across the board, and I'm looking at that generally, not just real estate. I mean, I've not seen any impacts yet, and I think, in my sense, generally with VC, which is really what we're talking about here, it's a long-term view. It's not about what happens in 6 months, 12 months. Obviously, they'd like the company to grow, but they're looking at an exit horizon in 6, 7, 8 years.
I think that's an important point. Like the VC time horizon is a 10-year time horizon. Like most VC funds are a 10-year term. You're investing over the first 5 years and you're divesting over the following 5 years. So anything that's going to be impacting the environment in the first 2 years of your fund term is not necessarily going to stop you from making the investment. It'll be a consideration in your due diligence. But just at a very microcosmic level, if I just look at us, we've ramped up our cross-border investments in Europe in the last 2 years. We've been investing all across Europe. So that hasn't stopped us, and I suspect that a lot of VCs would say the same thing.
I think also on that, that's also indicative of the maturing of the market. So, founder teams are very good quality generally these days. They're people who've been in the industries. They understand the problems, which is what you're hearing on the panel here. It's not just two guys in a bedroom anymore who sort of have an idea, which they think is a good idea, but doesn't really work for anybody who might actually use it. So, and London's always a big part of the VC space because there's access to capital, etc. But there's lots of other hubs building up across Europe with great founder teams and support and infrastructure. And investors these days are less constrained by borders. So, 6-7 years ago, if you wanted to get a US VC interested in your company, you'd have to flip to the US. You don't have to do that anymore. They'll come into the UK. So it's just a sign of the whole ecosystem. Not that I particularly like that word, but everything is building mature all the time.
You could argue that the pandemic has helped to kind of distribute out the ecosystem. Like if you take a look at what's happening in Silicon Valley, over in the US, it used to be a very concentrated ecosystem. Of course, there was the New York hub and there was the hub in the Valley, but now since the pandemic, a lot of startup founders have left and they realize they can work from wherever, and there's all kinds of distributed hubs forming. I think Europe has something similar happening. Like Berlin is a really exciting hub for PropTech, as is Paris, as are some of the Nordic countries. So you really, if you're looking for the best talent, you need to be scouting across the continent.
Does it make any difference to you, Jade, Brexit, or not?
For our customers, it has done in terms of, again, on the construction side, mainly from, there's a huge labour shortage at the moment anyway, and that's been exacerbated, really. But apart from that, it's a very it's an important piece of the construction process, but it's, in terms of investment in new buildings or types of stock that's going up or down, or where these organisations are basing themselves, it's not been a huge change for us. Because we track waste and material movements, we have noticed changes in material consumption patterns, and certain suppliers are shifting around in terms of ease of access, but otherwise not as big an impact as perhaps there could have been, I suppose, at least for us as an organisation.
Thank you for the question. We have one over here.
Thanks. I think it's a question for Faisal and maybe Will on the kind of long-term horizon that Faisal, you were talking about. VCs or investors would take a long-term 10-year horizon. How do you see consumer behavior shifting over this period because of pandemic? We have seen this whole shift around the Great Resignation, and before that it was all about people moving away from city center to outside. Now probably it's the other way around, flow, etc. But over the next 10 years on the residential real estate side, how does this settle on both rental and buyer side of the equation?
I think that question sounds perfect for you.
You're right that customer or consumer expectations changed a lot during the pandemic. I think it's pretty well documented, the race for space, and while that's slowed down a little bit in some areas, reversed very slightly, it feels like a lasting trend, and obviously that's driven a lot by changes in working patterns, and so where people can afford to be based. In terms of where I think the market is going and what consumers can expect to see over that time horizon, I believe that we're going to, within a small number of years, be in a position where you will have the ability to transact in a home and manage your home finances provided for you as a service for the first time ever. I'll explain very briefly what I mean by that. And this, I think, speaks to a lot of the PropTech space. Nobody's interests at the moment in the residential housing space are aligned with your own. No one. You have an estate agent. For one of our customers, they'll have to go to an estate agent. They'll talk to maybe an independent mortgage broker. They might go straight to the lender, but the lender will be involved. There'll be a surveyor. They might get their own home buyers report as a survey. The lender will instruct a valuation and use a different party for that. There'll then be a conveyancer. I won't go on, but as you can see, lots of people who do bit part roles, and they get paid in most instances regardless of the outcome, but none of them are aligned with the customer to take them from point A, which is like ideation, I want to buy this house, that's the only thing I care about, through to you moving into the front door, right? And that's going to change. The reason the industry's built this way around, I believe, is because there are so many sort of professional specialisms that exist within that chain. Banks, you know, my interest is what's my return on tangible equity. If I'm a lawyer, I'm probably, in most instances, not going to decide that my problem is solving, delivering a particular set of consumer outcomes. I'm just going to do the legal bit. And so, for whatever reason it is, but mostly just this complexity, nobody's ever really come around before and gone, you know what, there's an absolutely phenomenal opportunity here to change the game for consumers, to rescue a huge amount of value that's destroyed in between those gaps, that operates between the kickbacks between referral A and referrer B and so on. So a lot of money to put back into customers' pockets. That's one of the really exciting things, and that is why it's one of the things that drives affordability, but also liquidity. I mean, that's one of the areas that we're really excited about is when you bring these pieces of the puzzle together under one roof, what can you start to do for market liquidity? And once you start to influence liquidity, whether it's transacting in whole properties or going back to one of the themes of the presentation, facilitating fractional liquidity in properties, I believe that can have a major impact on affordability. Going back to the point earlier about stamp duty, the lack of liquidity in the housing market is one of the major reasons that we see structural growth in house prices well above inflation. So the vision that we have and the direction that I'm certain the market will be going in is, as a consumer one day, you will just have one party that looks after you buying a house. There will no longer be the complexity. It's just these guys do home buying. That's who I go to, and they'll look after me every step of the way.
So just to add to that, if you take a look at the UK consumer prop tech world, there's only one or two companies like the listing portals that are worth over $1 billion. So they're not unicorns because they're listed companies, but let's just put them all in the bucket of unicorns. There aren't really any consumer prop tech unicorns, and I think that's going to change. So we're on the lookout. We tend to invest more in B2B SaaS, less in consumer, just because of the risks involved. But we're definitely on the lookout for new consumer platforms, and I do buy into this vision that Will just painted, that there will be a platform, or if not a platform, I think that your conveyancer, estate agent, mortgage broker, and whatever other service providers that are out there will probably be tech-enabled companies that are all API'd together. So for the consumer, it's a seamless experience. We're a long way from that right now. So there's certainly going to be opportunities to watch out for there. And I think more unicorns will emerge within the consumer prop tech space.
Just one follow-up question from that. So does this, like the future Will you're painting, does this also lead to slightly different way of looking at business models? So no longer it's a classic marketplace, two-sided, click and kind of go, but it's much more of a deep market network where you start with solving one problem, but then go and add additional layers of support to be able to provide that end-to-end support to one consumer, basically.
I think that's spot on, because you're not going to find a business who is either going to want to or be able to do well all the jobs that people do within the market today. You're not going to have one company that's going to, take one example, surveys, right? And Rick's chartered surveyors. There is always going to be a need for people to go out and assess physical properties. As I said, risk tolerance, risk appetite dictates when it's suitable not to. But I think that you will increasingly see, or the direction businesses should be pushing is, how do you build tools for those surveyors, or how do you build tools for those mortgage advisors? How do you build tools for conveyancing solicitors that plug up into a single consumer platform? So that you need to be building not just a marketplace essentially for customers and a service to support them, but also business tools for the people who constitute the key players in the ecosystem.
Thanks. Thank you. Anyone else have a question you want to ask? Yeah.
Hi, James Donahue, MoveWise. We just touched on supply demand at the moment. It's obviously a really big challenge, and it's something that's been particularly prevalent due to the COVID challenges. What do you foresee over the next few years in terms of rectifying that problem and obviously alleviating some of the challenges, particularly perhaps for some of the first-time buyers out there?
Shall I take that one to start
Go
with?
for it. Yeah.
I mean, that's a rough question. People talk a lot about the shortage of housing supply, right? It's often pointed to as the reason for constantly rising house prices. There's not enough new supply being built. And that's definitely part of the problem. But actually, a really, maybe not even a contributing factor, but just as big a part of the problem is the increasing concentration of the housing stock in fewer and fewer hands, which is obviously the problem that we're trying to solve. How do we turn tenants into owners? So I think that liquidity, sort of the supply-demand challenge and getting enough supply into the market, of course, there's a big role for building to play to continue to bring new build supply to market. But I sort of point back to maybe one of the things I said earlier around addressing the liquidity challenge. There's a regulatory piece to play, and I'll see if I can just pull those two together for you. So liquidity is crap in the housing market, right? Everyone thinks of buying a home or selling a home as being painful because it takes a long time. There's lots of different people you have to deal with, and it's expensive. That's partly to do with technology. It's to do with the way that the land registry functions. It's to do with the way that ownership is actually recorded and documented and changed. So that's part of the problem. And that can be addressed through technology. There's a second part of the problem, which is that stamp duty as a framework, and I don't want to go in too hard on stamp duty today because no one will ever defend it, so it's not an interesting target to attack, but it fundamentally inhibits liquidity because it places a tax on moving home, not owning home, right? So what we've seen in the market over the last 10 years is people stop having their stepper homes. You buy your first home and people then stay in that home much longer than they used to and increasingly use the support of bank of mum and dad to eventually be able to trade up to the next home. But the incentive structure that's created for consumers now is to move home as infrequently as possible because you get taxed for moving, right? So again, not to weigh in on baby boomers too much, but your boomer will be sitting in their forever home paying nothing for owning outright a very valuable asset. Somebody who's just got onto the property ladder and is trying to work their way up will have a chunk of money taken out of their pocket every time they try to trade. So the entire market structure has been built to inhibit liquidity. So if that's fundamentally going to change, if we're going to have a liquid housing market that can address so many of the other problems that exist in this space, then we need a fundamental overhaul of the way in which transactions or housing wealth is taxed. And I just don't really see technology being able to do it alone when you've got such a strong financial incentive to people that's created by the tax structure to sit still and transact as infrequently as possible.
I mean, even in the construction space, we're seeing, when you come back to the point around supply, which is obviously where new builds come in, you've got modern methods of construction and different approaches now taken to either retrofit existing buildings and utilise space or what is considered dead space in different environments, such as flat roofs, for example, are now being considered for placing on different modules. And again, modular housing as part of MMC methods of construction are becoming increasingly popular. It's meant to drive efficiency, but it's also, in theory, a cheaper and quicker way to start building more stock. And we're seeing a lot more developers who are starting to utilise these methods now to help with some of those challenges. Ultimately, there's always going to be a problem that we're always going to, I think, demand in terms of new stock is always going to outstrip, at least for the short term, the supply and how quickly we can build new buildings. But hopefully some of those methods will help contribute to part of that challenge as well, from where we're seeing it.
There isn't a silver bullet here, but there are different tech solutions that are helping different parts of the problem. So we have a company called Land Tech that you may have heard of, and that founder, Johnny Britton, is very passionate about this topic. So he's built a platform that it's a data analytics platform that helps developers develop off-plan land, find and and quickly underwrite and due diligence off-plan land that they can help to increase the housing supply. So there are different tech solutions that are helping, but without the changes to legislation, it's not going to solve the problem.
Actually, interestingly, so we conversations with TfL over the last few years, they've changed their strategy because they're I think the single largest landowner in London, and most of that's completely dead space. And it's really interesting because they had a strategy, sort of a pivotal point about sort of 3-4 years ago now, where they were going through this motion of deciding whether or not to just sell off all of this excess land, or whether they would actually maintain it and start developing. And they've chosen the latter, which is probably the right move for TfL. But yeah, just interesting in terms of like all that space, and it's completely underutilized. So yeah, there's definitely there's still gaps there to be filled.
I have an entirely different question. So someone from the online audience, they sent in questions in advance. Someone wanted to talk about the metaverse. I don't know who the best person to chat to about this is. Maybe Faisal?
Definitely Faisal.
Maybe Faisal? Yeah, it just seems crazy, this renting and buying property in the metaverse. It's starting to feel like my best chance of owning a home, actually, in the metaverse. But
Yeah. So listen, I'm not a metaverse specialist at all, but actually our research team, which is sitting on that side of this room, are actually, our next big research white paper is going to be on the metaverse. So we're going to be exploring this space and just really understanding how it may shape the future of the sector. So Andrew, I don't know if Luke has talked to you about this, but we've been publishing research on a number of different topics. The metaverse is an area we're interested in. But we are starting to make investments already. So a good example, we have a company here, actually I can't really name names right now, but so one that we announced recently is a company called Dent Reality. They're using augmented reality to really help consumers in spaces find their way around. So it's the initial use case is wayfinding, and the very specific initial use cases within grocery retail. So, imagine you going to your local Sainsbury's and you can't find the vanilla that you need for, the cupcakes you're going to bake that evening, right? And I get lost all the time. It takes me like an hour to find things like that. And but this technology kind of is so it's actually what you would consider deep tech. There's a lot of engineering prowess that's gone into it, and to get down the level of accuracy that you can, using your phone and the augmented reality, actually get to the exact product that you need and be able to like really quickly add it to your shopping cart, be offered discounts, etc. So, but if you can make augmented reality work in that use case, then you can start to imagine, okay, well, let's look at other types of spaces where you may need help with getting around and interacting with your physical environment. So airports, stadiums, trade shows, shopping centers, etc. So the metaverse is coming, and I don't think the metaverse and real estate necessarily needs to mean that you're buying a plot in the metaverse and you believe that that's going to appreciate over time. Like I understand, stars like Snoop Dogg are buying plots, and now people are thinking, oh, should we be buying real estate? I'll tell you a funny story about this. I was at a board dinner for a major real estate company, and all the board members were sitting around, and they're of a different generation, and they looked genuinely scared, and I was called into that board dinner as a guest to speak to them about some of the innovation that's happening in the space. And they looked frightened, and they said, over dinner, they said, Faisal, tell us about the metaverse, and how is it going to change our business? And I was like, listen, I don't know, and we're on the front lines and we're investing in all these different things, but nobody really knows what's going to happen. But I don't think that, as a board and CEO of a major real estate company, like that should be the top of your worry right now. There's lots of other problems going on. There's like tenancy issues, and there's vacancies and stuff. So I think, I would keep my eye on it and see what's happening in the metaverse and how the investment volumes are picking up. But I wouldn't, as a UK REIT or investment manager, I wouldn't start saying, okay, I need to set up a metaverse fund and start investing there just yet. There are other more near-term applications of the metaverse, and the augmented reality app that I just shared with you is kind of something that you can really understand has a real world application today.
Cool. There we have it.
Yeah.
Nice. So I'm looking at the time. I think we have about 10 minutes left, 9 minutes. We might have time for one more question if anyone fancies it from the audience. Yep, this guy here.
Good evening. I'm Andrew from Amplify Solutions. Firstly, to all the panel, thank you very much for your insights. They've been fascinating. I'll preface this with the fact I am an optimist, but maybe to pick up on something that Faisal said there, how do you think that the prop tech industry might be resilient, or how do you think they might be exposed to potential adjustment in the housing market, both nationally and internationally?
To the housing market specifically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I
do you
don't know
mean
if that was rhetorical.
resilient in relation to the metaverse? Sorry.
No, not so much the metaverse, but just in terms of prop tech as a sector and all the technology and the investment that's going into these companies around the property market. But obviously, in the last couple of years, house prices have been going up. There's been obviously a sort of a buoyant market, but in terms of potentially upcoming adjustment, how do you think that will impact not just the investment, but also the actual the businesses that have had that investment, the point?
Yeah.
On the residential, I'd love to hear your perspective on commercial and what vacancies have done to sort of startups and newer growth businesses in the commercial space. On the residential side, there's definitely been an increasing number of business models I've seen that monetize in rising house price environments. Their business models are designed to essentially profit share and leave themselves quite heavily exposed on the downside, sort of essentially models that are more or less writing put options. So I think that there are certain types of business model in the residential space that are pretty exposed. But I don't think it's anything structurally that's sort of widespread enough that it would have any major impact on the market. We've just seen the same thing from lenders that we always see, which is the more house prices go up, the more risk appetite goes up into the end of the cycle. So, like proliferation of higher LTV mortgages and things is being classically, cyclically poorly timed.
I think you'd have to be a very specific type of prop tech business to be affected by house prices in residential house prices in the UK. But as we discussed earlier, like prop tech is a sprawling sector that cuts across so many different disciplines, and I don't know, a company that helps office buildings be more sustainable has a real tailwind behind it because office developers need to meet the kind of legislation that's coming into the space, and house prices wouldn't affect it at all. So you'd have to be quite narrow to be affected by that, I think.
So we've conflated home ownership with housing supply. I don't think we need to be evangelical about home ownership. There's nothing wrong with having a very big rental sector. And one of a prop tech business that we've seen in the US, for example, Invitation Homes, owns 80,000 single family homes, which it then rents out. And I think one of the things you might well see, if there were a housing crash, for example, you'd see these businesses using pension fund money to buy homes and then renting them out professionally, probably putting the right environmental improvements into them, offering a good customer service, using prop tech, using AVMs, using all sorts of things that will improve choice. And while I absolutely respect William's point of view, and of course I'm a homeowner and I'm speaking from that position, I think we do have to accept that more rental property would be a good thing, and it would probably free up a lot of supply as well, because if you're a house builder, you are forced to effectively ration because you can't sell that many homes in one location fast. You have to ration it. But if you can pre-sell 100 homes to a pension fund that's going to rent them out, like Legal & General or somebody, then you'll find that you free up a hell of a lot of supply very quickly. So I suspect there is a prop tech answer to this, which is to do with rental and efficient home ownership
of that portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's definitely not home flipping, by the way. It's not open door, it's not iBuyers, it's a completely different model.
Legal & General Capital do and the program that Lloyds Bank has started to bring supply to market specifically for that purpose, I completely agree, is a net positive for customers.
Great, so I think we have 4 minutes left. Time just to go a quick sweep through everyone one last time, I think. Maybe just very quickly ask everyone one thing you're excited about, one trend, one thing on the PropTech that really buoys you, that you really feel passionate about, and one worry you have for the sector as well. Who wants to start? Faisal?
Yeah, happy to. So, I mean, there's lots of things that excite me about the sector. I'm obviously, bullish on PropTech, which is why, we're actively investing in this space. But one of the trends that we're excited about is that after a long time of PropTech startup mainly raising capital from very niche PropTech funds and perhaps angels who came from the property industry and saw the vision, we're finally seeing the generalist VCs, and that's the holy grail for a new sector, right? You're seeing the mainstream generalist VCs coming into rounds with us and with others, and that's the best type of. I mean, it's not the best, but it's a really good combination to have. You have a PropTech specialist like us and others, and going in alongside the mainstream guys, and the mainstream generalist VCs will only back you if they really believe it's going to be a big and scalable business. It's a financial underwrite. It's not a strategic underwrite. They don't have investors and LPs like us who are REITs and developers and want to get access to these technologies. They're purely looking at it because they believe it's going to be a big, global, scalable business. And you're starting to see the turn of that tide. And that's super exciting, right? We think that's a real turning point for the sector, and it's a sign that the sector is maturing. So that I'm excited about. What worries me, I don't think it's a PropTech specific challenge, but if you speak to most PropTech founders and you ask them what they're worried about, the main thing is talent. Like, they just can't hire the people that they need fast enough, be it sales teams or programming talent. And that is probably the main challenge across all tech founders, and some of you, I'm sure Will and Jade will have something to say about this. So I don't think it's PropTech specific, but I think what's really interesting is since the pandemic happened, you have distributed workforces. Now teams are thinking, okay, well, I'm a UK company and all my team is in the UK, but actually I can hire like those 3 people in Bucharest and those 5 people in Sofia and those 3 people in Johannesburg and build a distributed team and just get the product out there and sell the product to the volumes that I want to sell. So companies are innovating around it. So it's a worry, but I'm seeing, the light at the end of the tunnel.
I think we only have like 20 seconds each.
I'm so sorry.
Good answer though.
Can I do 2 optimistic things and no downsides? I picking up on the AR piece, I'm seeing some really interesting uses of AR in construction tech, which I think is good. Also, and this is not empirical, but cap tables that I see, there's often corporates on them at an earlier stage in the PropTech space, and I think that's a good sign.
Nice. I mean, from my side, I mentioned it earlier, but I've dealt a lot with environmental legislation over the last few years in particular, and I never thought I'd get excited about environmental legislation like this one, but Part Z is genuinely going to be going to change the way that we build new buildings from next year onwards. It's similar to sort of some flagship pieces that we've seen over the last few decades, particularly in the UK and rest of Europe. Like the Clean Air Act was a very definitive piece of legislation back in the 70s. So that, I think, is going to be a complete game changer when it comes to new stock. I think some of the, what's the other side to that? It was some of the worries, yes. So I think from a wider sector, I'm slightly concerned about there's a huge digital literacy skills gap particularly in the construction space at the moment. That needs to narrow very quickly, and one of my biggest fears is that it's going to take an extra year or 2 to really get to a space where we need it to be, and that's going to be quite challenging for a lot of different PropTech companies for different reasons. But also just to echo what Faisal was saying earlier about recruitment and talent for any business, I don't think it's specific to PropTech per se. Particularly at the moment, for a bunch of reasons, it's very, very challenging. So I think that's going to remain a challenge for the foreseeable future as well.
I know we've got negative time, so I'll just say, for the sector, I'm just optimistic. I think that a lot of mistakes have been made over the last 15 years in the PropTech space because there are a lot of really difficult challenges to solve, and I think lots of lessons have already been learned. And I agree with Faisal that there's a lot more capital coming into the sector now because I think the business models that are attacking problems now have learned from their predecessors, and so I think that there's undeniably been a big change in attitudes towards the space in a really short period of time. I think that that's going to lead to a lot of really exciting new businesses in this area. So I'm going to just stick on the optimistic side.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to the online audience, and thank you to everyone here. Great questions as well from the floor. And thanks to the panel. Thank you.